Hello, everybody. I'm Ramon, and I'm just a lonely world traveler tech. And I'm with my friend Tammy. We're going to discuss a lot of issues surrounding racism here on onlinemags.co.za. Join us. You go ahead.
You brought up a couple of things. You brought up systems. You brought up sports, because that's
Right.
another thing. When you talk about attacking systems, that's personal opinion. Okay, side note, this is not part of the interview, but however, I feel
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
Sean Carter, Jay-Z, that's what he's doing. He's going after the system by infiltrating the
Hmm.
NFL. And a
Right.
lot of people just
Hmm.
don't
Hmm.
see it that way until of course
Right.
it becomes obvious. And it takes time. That's
Right.
another thing. That's another thing. These
Right.
systems have been around for long.
One of the fundamental perspectives that we have to change as Black people, that other communities understand. And when I say other communities, I mean other non-white communities. We don't understand the long game. We don't. We over celebrate these short symbolic victories, and we don't realize that the permanent victory is in the long game. And that's one of the clear distinctions between, and I can only speak mostly from a Black American perspective. Even though I've been to your country a number of times, I know somewhat about what goes on there. There are some similarities, and so there are some stark differences. But one of the differences that I recognize myself is Black people have been in America pretty much since white people have been there. They were there a little bit longer than us, but we've been there almost as we've actually been there longer than some white families, because a lot of them came during the early 20th century through Ellis Island and whatnot. So one of the things you see is that a community can come to America and for the first generation or two really deal with a lot of trouble, hard times, financial hardships and whatnot. But in the long run, because they played the long game, and they directed their energies and their money to more profitable enterprises, their kids are now the power brokers in their communities. We haven't. We celebrate symbolic victories, policy changes, which, if it's not enforced, it means nothing. Tearing down statues or name changes and whatnot, or seeing Black people on a movie, right? But we have not redirected our money and our energies toward long game goals. And that's one of the reasons why we are where we are, because we settle. Let me give you an example. Do you remember a few years ago when there was a white gentleman that walked into a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina, and shot and killed 9 people? All right. Right. And the narrative plays out the same every time. A white guy commits an atrocity to Black people. Then suddenly white people, who are the first ones to want blood when their country or their community is attacked, here they come. Let's let cooler heads prevail. Let's let forgiveness and let's appeal to our Judeo-Christian values. And we're all the same. We're all brothers. Let's not let this tragedy divide us. Let's let it unite us. Okay. So what do? Black people should have used this moment to try to create change, to try to say, this is what we're talking about. But what happened? They took the Confederate flag in South Carolina, something that they did not want to budge on, and they said, okay, we'll take this flag down from the State House. And just like magic, Black people were satisfied with that.
Let's
It was such a staged, how it's like you exchanged a symbol for the value of 9 lives that were taken by a white terrorist in a church.
let's throw
You know,
something let's throw something else in the
yeah,
in the works there.
yeah. Hmm.
So I just thought about it now. They did not escape my mind. Hold on. Is it? Oh yeah, yeah. Here we go. Is it because we do not understand politics? And here's why I'm asking, because everywhere where there is a Chinatown, it's literally recognized by the law, protected by the law, enforced. You wouldn't find any non-Chinese product there. That tells me one thing, that Chinese understand politics, and politics are the cornerstone of
Yes,
economies. Well, any economy, that is. You understand? So do we have a problem with that? Do we not understand that? Because that also plays into the long game, wouldn't you say?
brother, you're taking the words right out of my mouth. I'm going to say this, and I think you'd agree with me. We don't understand the relationship between money and politics. We like money, but we don't understand how to use it. We think money is there for us to buy a bunch of nonsense, to feed our defeated and our defeated self-images, our damaged egos, to make us feel better. And the money, and I'm gonna get to the politics part of it in a minute. Ironically, the stuff we buy is from American and European companies, which are part of the social, political, the economic, political system that oppresses us. So we don't understand that money is a tool, not something we exchange to buy a bunch of crap so we can show it off on Instagram, so we feel good for a few minutes. And in a capitalist society, which the world is under, I don't care if a country calls itself democratic or socialist or even communist, this is a capitalist global world. And money, capital, is your voice and your power. And Black people literally take their voice and their power and give it right to the system that oppresses them. They don't understand that that money is like a brick you can use to build and to empower yourself. The other communities come in and they understand that, because the first thing they do is open a business. All right, they control and they hire their own. Now we criticize that, but that's genius. That's genius, because that gives you not only money. See, we look at it in terms of, oh man, he's driving a nice car, he has nice clothes. It's not about that. That gives you power and control over your own destiny. We have been duped into thinking that we can change the political situation by boycotts, marches, and protests. That does not work, because unlike the 1950s and 60s, when you only had 3 channels on your television and you were forced to look at that, today you can turn it off. You have 10,000 ways to entertain yourself. Nobody cares. We waste our money because we don't understand that that is our ticket to power. Racism is essentially about power. It's not, I mean, we can talk about how it started, and we could talk about, you know, white supremacy and inferiority versus superiority and all this madness about how Black people are inferior biologically. Those are just myths and methods to maintain a power structure where white is on top and Black is on bottom. And the only way in a capitalist system that you can do that is to redirect your money.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
So now, how in this power struggle, would you
Yes.
agree that the Black person is a commodity?
Yes. But just because that's the way it is doesn't mean that's the way it remains. I'm gonna give an example. When Chinese people, and I hate to keep using Asians as you know, the poster boy of advancement, but if you look at American society right now, and I'll get back to that, okay? Asian people have overtaken white people in terms of income, not wealth, because wealth is what you own and control. Income is what you make. We need to learn that too. Black people don't understand that if you make $200,000 a year but you don't own anything, you're broke, because if you get fired, what have you got to fall back on? It goes back to but anyway, they came to America as labor, not slave labor, but cheap labor to help build the railroads. Okay. Not all Asians came, but that's just one part of the Asian community. that came to America. They utilized the long game and keeping things in the community to position themselves now as the highest money makers and best educated people in a country that we have been programmed to think white people were the top. Now how did they supplant? They didn't supplant them by marching and protesting and boycotts, simply by what they did with their energy and their money. And yes, we are commodities. We are commodities, especially in the entertainment industry. Our art and our creativity in America is commoditized and exported the world over, yet we don't own it.
I would go as far as saying, so since slavery and now, there's little change. You understand? Because we still being
in terms of us,
still being exported across the diaspora.
In terms of us owning what we do, you know, whether it's picking cotton on the plantation or building ships, you know, in some northeastern American city as a slave.
I get you now.
What we do has always been controlled by white people. If I want to be a rapper and I'm good, I have to exchange my lyrical ability, my talents, for money to a white-owned entity. And he may give me cash, and I may be rich, but he has the wealth. I will die, and he will own my creation, and he will dictate who can rent or lease or use my creation. We have settled for the cash, for the quick buck. We have settled for exchanging that to someone else, for someone else to own it. You look at sports, all right? There's plenty of great black players, right? They're household names. They make $200 or $300 million. But who owns the teams that they play on? If he makes millions, who's making billions? The NBA has 30 teams. There's only one black owner, Michael Jordan. And in order for him to buy that team, he had to buy it from the only other black owner, Bob Johnson. The NBA is 75 to 80% black. And let's be real, the superstars are overwhelmingly black. People don't go to games. If the superstars left, people are not going to go to those games to watch a bunch of 6'5" white guys shoot jumpers. Black labor is the sole reason why that league is a multi-billion-dollar league. Yet, even though the players have made more money, the ownership remains overwhelmingly white. The executives are overwhelmingly white. That's what racism is. It's the power structure. It's not simply we have more rich black people now. Is that translating into black ownership and control? If at the end of the day we still have to come to a white man to get things done, it's still not right.
Wow, that's amazing, and that is.
Well, if you look at that, it's the same as the plantation, as you said. Mm-hmm. White ownership, black labor. Yeah. Now, of course, LeBron James and James Harden, they're not making slave wages, but their bosses are the same. The conditions, the construction is the same. Whether you're talking about the NFL, Major League Baseball, you guys watch football, we call it soccer. The same thing. White ownership, black labor. We don't see it for what it is. The system is exactly the same. Remember I said symbols versus systems. The system is exactly the same. The amount of money is different. But at the end of the day, who writes the checks and who controls? See, that's what it is. Racism is about power. Power is simply control.
Which is basically politics.
and yes, and we think money is for being flashy and being rich. Money is for changing that dynamic, and we have not graduated to that yet.
Wow. So now I follow a guy on Instagram, Jay Morrison. He's a real estater. He's a realtor.
Hmm.
Sorry, he's a realtor. That's the term, right?
Hmm.
I'm correct. So he was basically talking about just black people as a nation are not being recognized in America, right?
Of course not.
Yeah, and he was saying it's so
Right.
simple, however, to force America to recognize black people as a nation constitutionally,
Hmm.
by law, definitely. And he gave
Hmm.
us he gave it like a very simple structured formula. He's like, okay, cool, because it also relates to, again, we use Chinese people in all these examples. I mean, let's just accept we're going to use Asians in these examples.
All right.
Yeah, so in SA we recognize Chinese people as a nation, and I read somewhere that the numbers
Hmm.
are simple. You just have to reach about 400,000 and then register,
Hmm.
and then all of a sudden,
Hmm.
not all of a sudden, but you need to get backing from your
Right.
motherland, right? So basically China has
Hmm.
to raise their hands
Hmm.
and be like, we recognize those people in your country. This is how we have Chinese, Chinatowns. This is how we Chinese get to
Hmm.
be protected by the law somehow when it comes to business, because of course money plays a part in it,
Hmm.
but they play the long game. So Jay Morrison was like this. He used the LGBT example. It's like those people have a flag. There's a reason. The flag is the symbol of the nation, right? um
Hmm.
LGBT, that LGBT community got backing from some European country that says, hey, treat those people fairly. This is why LGBT community in America got reparations before Africans have. Africans out there still crying for reparations. Isn't that correct?
You mean okay? But reparations, you mean in terms of some kind of
Remuneration, reimbursed by
well,
cash wise.
they haven't. I would say there hasn't been uh reparations in terms of cash for that community, but definitely that community has been able to make progress because they are well organized and they do understand the relationship between money and politics. Um, so they've been able to make strides forward in that sense. There hasn't been like recognition of them as a nation per se. Now, nation would change context from South Africa to America in that sense. We would use the word community. Um, yeah, we
Correct.
we would use the word community. Now, in terms of recognizing Black Americans as a separate community, uh, there is that recognition. In terms of monetary reparations, I really don't think that will happen. I think the issue in terms of, and I want to get to the government in a minute because my perspective on that may be a little bit different than most people's. I actually think, just before I get there, I just want to say I actually think Black people in America need to stop looking to the government for help because that's not going to happen. And even if it does, there's always going to be strings attached. I'm under the belief that we have the wherewithal financially and skill wise and intelligence wise if we would just organize to change our own destiny and help ourselves up. When you look at attempts by the government in America to quote unquote help Black people, it's translated into housing projects and social welfare programs that they do good to a certain extent, but we seem to have become trapped in these cycles. And I don't necessarily think that depending on the government outside of protecting people's rights, and will that ever happen? I don't know. I don't think that depending on the government is or looking to the government for some sort of recognition is the way to go. Um, but definitely, we are recognized as a community, but I think that recognition itself is not, or even policy making is not the answer. Because if you think about it, you guys have a constitution. We have a constitution, okay? Within those constitutions are guaranteed rights for all citizens. If that itself was enforced equally, you wouldn't need to add additional policies to the Constitution. The additional policies only indict the Constitution or the enforcers of the Constitution from not doing what they're supposed to do in the first place. You can add policy after policy after policy. Unless those policies are one, enforced, and two, enforced equally, they're meaningless. We had, listen, the disparities that existed during the civil rights movement, okay, that took place in the 50s and 60s, they still exist. There was the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, right? Those were put on there. But the disparities still exist. Some of the percentages have gotten a little better, but when you look at the ladder, white is still on top and black is still on bottom. Why is that? The policy was supposed to change that. We are 2 generations removed from that. Obviously, policy making alone is not the answer. I think looking towards the government is about as good as looking towards white people in general to help us or to accept us or to enlighten them to see us as equals. That is a waste of time. Our salvation, and I don't want to sound religious, but the solution to this problem must come from us. We did not create it. We didn't create it. Of course we didn't. But it's like Steve Biko said, black man, you're on your own. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. I'm gonna stop right here and let you, because I want to use one example. It's going to take too long. I'm gonna let you ask your next question.
No, that's a great quote from Steve Biko, and I like the perspective on it that you placed. That it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It shouldn't be, actually.
Right.
For example,
right.
in SA, if I have to put like the ratio from black to white in perspective, I'd say 25-1. For every one white person, there's like 25 black people. You know, so
right.
that's just
right.
me and how I see things. But anyway, how do we back to America? Police brutality. How do the diaspora contribute to protecting Black Americans?
Wow, how does the diaspora contribute to protecting Black Americans? I think in a limited sense, the only thing they can do, and it would be effective to a degree, is to continue to put pressure on the municipalities to make these departments more accountable. I mean, let's look at why it happens. Why do we see disproportionately black men, black people in general, but specifically black men, get abused and killed by police, and not only that, become falsely imprisoned and receive harsher sentences than white people for the same crime? Why do we see that? Because it goes back to the fact that black people, that black lives don't hold the same value, and that police view us as more dangerous, and that when they do shoot and kill us, when they do abuse us, they get away with it. So it becomes a cycle. We can be shot and killed because all he or she has to say is, "I fear for my life," and they'll get off. And they'll get off because we're perceived as more dangerous than white people, you know. And on top of that, our lives are not as valued as other people's lives are. The diaspora, as far as the diaspora goes, they should just continue making noise about it. Okay, making noise about it, putting pressure on these people, on these municipalities. But the thing is, unlike other countries, the distance between a local police force or a local government and a state government versus the federal government is a huge distance. In other places, the federal government has a shorter leash between itself and local police. In America, there's a lot of steps, a lot of levels of power between what, you know, the rhetoric that the president can enact, or an act he can sign, or whatever, you know, some executive order, I should say, versus what a local cop has the power to do in his little town. Okay, that's where internal politics has to play a part. I honestly think the police system, the way policing is done, which has, been pretty much the same way for generations, that has to be uprooted and fundamentally changed. It has to be changed in terms of what it is required to be a police officer, in terms of education or experience. It has to be a change in terms of who they recruit. Being a police officer is not the same as being in the military. So, and I've served in the military myself. So my father was actually a police officer for a small amount of time. So I have experience in the two worlds. Okay. Um, Recruiting people that just came from Iraq, dealing with PTSD in Afghanistan, even though they want a job and they have experience with weapons and in combat situations and they're in good physical shape, they are not always necessarily the best people to be engaging with the community. Engaging with combatants in the desert is not the same as engaging with common everyday citizens on the streets, especially when those police don't live in the neighborhoods they police, which goes to another thing. Police officers should be policing communities they live in. This may sound crazy, but I think we need more Black police in Black areas. And secondly, the we call it the blue shield, the power of police unions and police organizations needs to be weakened, because a Black police officer shouldn't have to choose between protecting the people in his community and being loyal to his brotherhood, which is made up of a lot of white people that are not part of his community. He shouldn't be put in that position, to compromise who he is and the oath that he took to serve and protect his community.
Wow, that's okay. Now that puts it in perspective. I get you. So we can go on and on and on. We only have 5 minutes.
Yeah, man, I'm sorry.
I'm loving this conversation, but we only have about
All
4 minutes now. Okay, let me squeeze in one question
right.
now. In terms of eradication of the whole racism thing, that's a tough one. So now, just 3 pointers, right, that you can give us.
Mhm.
How can we eradicate racism?
Racism comes from a power structure. We have to put ourselves in those positions of power and influence. You're not going to eradicate racism through enlightenment or appealing to the sensibilities and ethics of white people, trying to convince them that we are equal, we are the same, that race is a social construct and it's a myth. That's not going to work. This is about power. You can only change the power of racism by putting yourselves in positions of power. Um, White people know it's wrong. White people are aware of the disparities. They only act surprised and act like they disagree with you, because to be aware of something, to acknowledge something, means you are responsible for changing it when you realize it's wrong. So if I can keep my eyes shut and keep this blindfold on, then I can still hold on to my privilege and access and opportunity that I'm denying I have. That's all it is. We need to vacate this pursuit of trying to be accepted and trying to appeal to white people and convince them that we're equal. They know we are. Okay? They know all that superiority nonsense is foolishness. This is essentially about holding on to power because of fear. Fear that one day I may be you. And in their minds, it's an either or situation. Either I conquer or I'm going to be conquered. So that's what it's all about. I think that trying to eradicate the existence of racism in people's minds is a waste of time, because people are going to do their best to hold on to power. And if that means clinging to an archaic, wrong, ridiculous, ignorant way of thinking, if that will continue to allow me to have power, I'm going to do that.
Wow, wow. Mr. Raymond, appreciate your time, man.
No problem, man.
It's been a very engaging. I love this conversation. I've enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. Take care.
Mr. Raymond, cheers, man.
All right. All right.